Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The Newman home was filled with an oppressive stillness, thick, heavy and hard to ignore. The kind that only follows tragedy. With sunken eyes and shaking hands, Sharon sat on the edge of the couch, holding on to the final picture of her son, Noah. Her heart, broken into a million irreparable pieces, was unable to accept the loss of the youngster who had once brought joy and laughter into her home. Genoa City had been rocked by the news of Noah's passing like a bolt of lightning, but for Sharon it was more than simply grief. It was the kind of torment that took away her sanity. And shortly, a side of her that had been hidden for years will be shown to everyone. With every second that went by, Sharon's thoughts darkened and her mind started to fall apart until she could only think about one thing. Someone had to pay. Sharon's disturbed state caused her to relive every memory she had of Noah, including his first heartbreak, his efforts to find his place in the world, and his childlike giggle when he raced through the water in the backyard. Every picture tore at her heart, but the craziness started to set in when she considered his final weeks on Earth. Noah had been aloof, melancholy, and preoccupied. Although he had told her about his split, Sharon was unaware of the extent of his suffering. In her tormented mind, the pieces started to fit together as she sat staring blankly at his phone messages. Noah's ex-girlfriend was to blame, the one who had left him to perish and alone. The person who had broken his heart and, in Sharon's opinion, led him directly to his demise. Sharon didn't get much sleep that night. The anarchy within her was reflected in the storm outside. Tears were flowing down her face as she walked the floor, muttering to herself as lightning flashed across the sky. Desperate for hints, she started going through Noah's old belongings in an attempt to find something that would explain what had happened. But she was filled with rage rather than closure. Noah and his ex exchanged texts that revealed their difficult parting. Words like "you're better off without me" and "I can't do this anymore" were like knives stabbing her heart. Sharon's vision became blurry with anger, and her breathing became shallow. She repeatedly spoke the ex-girlfriend's name like a curse. She growled into the night, "You did this to him. You shattered him." Sharon's anguish had turned into an obsession by dawn. A darker, colder version of Sharon, motivated by pure agony, had taken the place of the formerly loving and caring woman who had spent years attempting to keep her family together. She started making unexpected appearances where she believed Noah's former partner may be. Her tone turned stern and accusing as she began to ask subtle questions. Those in her immediate vicinity observed the shift. Sharon refused to listen to Nick's attempts to calm her down. She believed that Noah's ex-girlfriend was concealing something, and that there was more to his death than anyone wanted to acknowledge. It wasn't in public when Sharon finally confronted her. Rather, it happened late one evening at Crimson Lights, the very coffee shop that Sharon used to proudly own. Unaware that Sharon was present, the ex-girlfriend had entered and placed a shaky latte order. From the shadows, Sharon observed her, her grief turning into rage as her eyes narrowed. Her remarks were venomous, but her voice was eerily calm as she approached slowly. Sharon remarked, "You have no idea what you've done." Startled, the young woman turned. "Sharon, I really apologize for Noah's ordeal. Don't mention his name." "I never wanted." Sharon slammed her fist on the counter and yelled, "After what you did to him, you are not allowed to mention his name." The tension in the cafe was thick enough to cut with a knife, and everyone froze. The girl stammered as she tried to explain that she loved Noah, but didn't know how to support him longer, and that she had broken up with him because she believed he needed time to focus on himself. Sharon, however, was not paying attention. The reality had been distorted into something completely different by her anguish. She saw the girl's tears as false and her regret as a ruse. Sharon spat. "He was fine before you came along. You played with his emotions, gave him the impression that you were concerned, and then you destroyed him. If it weren't for you, he wouldn't have given up." The girl ran away in tears, but Sharon didn't regret it. She had a sense of control and a target for her suffering for the first time since Noah's passing. Sharon's mental condition worsened during the next few days. She started cutting herself off from everyone who was important to her. When Mariah attempted to get in touch with her, Sharon responded in a chilly, aloof, and even suspicious manner. She asserted that there was a plot to shield Noah's ex-girlfriend, and that others were attempting to hide the truth about his demise. Heartbroken and worried, Nick begged Sharon to get assistance, but she refused. One night, with tears in her eyes, she murmured, "You didn't see what she did to him. The way he sobbed when she departed was not audible to you. Nick, she killed him. Perhaps with her heart rather than her hands." Sharon's grief soon began to have an impact on how she behaved in public. Her hair was unkempt, her face aloof, and she arrived at the memorial service wearing all black. Sharon sat quietly, her jaw gritted, as others spoke well of Noah. She stood in front of the audience when it was her turn to speak, tears welling up in her eyes, but rather than offering a tribute, she snapped. She continued, her voice shaking with rage. "You all talk about how wonderful he was, but none of you really knew him. You allowed him to suffer." As she turned to face Noah's ex, who was sobbing in the front row, gasps erupted throughout the room. "You let her destroy him." Before Nick yanked her away, Sharon cried out, "You should be the one in the ground, not him." Sharon became the buzz of Genoa City following her outburst. Behind closed doors, friends gossiped about her, speculating that she might have permanently lost her mind. She was feared by some and pitied by others, but nobody knew how to assist her. She was totally overcome with grief. She stopped sleeping and eating, and she sat in Noah's old room for hours chatting to his photographs as though he were still there. She said, "Tell me what to do, sweetheart." There were moments when she felt as though she could hear his voice responding to her, a gentle echo that pushed her to exact revenge. "Tell me how to make it right." Nick became desperate. In the hopes that therapy would help Sharon regain her sense of reality, he reached out to Dr. Anderson. However, Sharon's delusions got worse even during therapy. She revealed to the therapist that Noah's ex had orchestrated everything and had used emotional manipulation to drive him insane. She claimed to have evidence, including made-up texts and warped recollections that were only in her head. Nick was alerted by the doctor that Sharon was experiencing a serious psychological break, brought on by grief and guilt. However, Sharon saw the doctor as simply another somebody attempting to stifle her truth. Before long, Sharon started acting independently. She began tracking Noah's ex's whereabouts and snapping pictures of her. She even broke into her flat one evening, certain that there would be proof of foul play. Rather, she discovered a box of Noah's old possessions that the girl had been unable to leave with, including pictures, letters, and a necklace he had given her. When Sharon realized how much the girl had loved him too, she briefly froze and started crying. However, her anguish immediately turned that insight into fury. "Did you not keep these to torment yourself?" she muttered. "Because you know what you did deep down." After the ex-girlfriend reported Sharon for harassment, the police were eventually contacted. Before things got out of hand, Nick and Faith pleaded with Sharon to stop, but she refused. "I'm not insane," she yelled. "I'm a mother trying to get justice for her son. Yet this preoccupation stemming from insanity has nothing to do with justice anymore." In actuality, Sharon was blaming herself in addition to Noah's ex. She felt deep down that she had failed to save her boy and had overlooked the warning signs. Furthermore, it was simpler to assign that guilt to someone else than to confront the intolerable reality that she was powerless to keep him safe. Sharon's illusion and reality blended together over the course of several weeks. In her nightmares, she started to see Noah and hear his voice calling her name. He implored her to forgive and go on in one eerie vision. Sharon, however, was unwilling to let go. "After you're gone, how can I move on?" She spoke softly to the vacant space. "While she's still alive, how can I forgive?" Her anguish had taken over entirely, changing her into an unrecognizable version of herself. One evening, Sharon found herself standing outside the ex-girlfriend's apartment once more while holding a framed picture of Noah, which was the tipping point. After giving it a lengthy look, she placed it on the doorstep. She said, "You'll never comprehend what you took from me." Then, with tears flowing down her face and an irreparably broken psyche, she turned and left into the darkness. Sharon checked herself into Fairview Psychiatric Hospital a few days later. Finally persuading her that she needed assistance, Nick and Mariah stood by her side. Sharon's voice broke as the physicians asked her why she had come. She whispered, "Because I can't stop seeing him." It was the most honest thing she had uttered in months, And I can't stop hating her. Sharon at last started to face her loss in the hospital's clean white walls. With time and therapy, she gradually came to realize that her animosity towards Noah's former partner was unjustified. She had needed an outlet for her suffering, but she had selected the wrong one. She was willing to try, even if the path to recovery would be lengthy and possibly never-ending. She knew in her heart that Noah wouldn't want his mother to live a life driven by retaliation. He would want her to be at ease. And perhaps one day she might. As she sat by herself in a hospital room, whispering her son's name into the silence, Sharon Newman, who had once exuded warmth and hope, was now a shadow of her former self. She sobbed and whispered, "I'm sorry, Noah. I simply couldn't let you go." One thing remained constant despite her broken state. A mother's love never completely dies, even when it is distorted by grief and insanity. It just clings, endless, painful, and haunting. The hallways of Fairview were calm but not serene. The antiseptic walls hummed with the faint echoes of broken minds. People screaming in the night, muttering to ghosts, haunted by things no one else could see. One of them was Sharon Newman. She hardly moved or spoke throughout the first few days. Sitting by the window, she gazed down at the garden below, where patients meandered like lost souls. Her heart was heavy, her eyes were empty, and her thoughts were still stuck in Noah's final moments. She wasn't prepared when the physicians attempted to contact her. Her hands would shake excessively and her body would stiffen whenever Noah's name was uttered. The sadness remained searing, an open wound that would not go away. Sometimes she would whisper to herself, her words barely audible, "He was my child." Those who overheard her sympathized with her, understanding that no therapy could ever fully ease the anguish of losing a kid. He wasn't supposed to go first. During those initial weeks, Nick visited nearly every day, but each visit seemed to cause him more pain than the last. In an attempt to close the gap between them, he would sit across from her, but Sharon would ignore him as if he didn't exist. One day he took her hand and whispered, "You don't have to do this alone." First she didn't answer. There was a long pause before she whispered, "I'm not alone. He is present." Nick felt his stomach drop. "Honey, Sharon, Noah's gone." Her eyes flashed with startling ferocity as her head swung towards him. "No, you dare not say that," she sobbed. "He has not left. I sense him." With tears flowing down her cheeks, she looked back to the window as her voice broke. "He talks to me. He wants me to remember." Sharon awoke from a dream that night with her heart pounding. Noah's face glowed in the moonlight as he stood in the garden below in the dream. He had a serene, even angelic smile on his face, but he vanished when she attempted to touch him. When she woke up, her pillow was drenched in tears. She yelled his name, but all that was left was his voice echoing faintly, "Let me go, Mom." Sharon eventually consented to begin therapy seriously after that dream. She was hesitant to speak at the beginning of her meetings with Dr. Reeves. Every word seemed like a thorn. However, the walls she had constructed gradually started to crumble. One day, Sharon said in a shaky voice, "I don't know who I am anymore. I was strong once. I used to look after everyone. But right now, I'm unable to even look after myself." Dr. Reeves gave a soft nod. "Sharon, you've experienced unspeakable loss. Even the strongest person can feel like they are falling apart after losing a kid. However, the feelings you're experiencing, such as guilt and rage, are all components of grieving. You placed the blame on Noah's ex-girlfriend because it provided direction for your suffering. It lessened the senselessness of your loss." Sharon twisted the tissue in her fingers while gazing at her hands. She shattered him. When he most needed her, she abandoned him. "Perhaps she did," the physician murmured. "However, that does not prove that she is the cause of his disappearance. It wasn't her fault that Noah was in misery, similar to how it wasn't yours." Sharon felt like she was slapped by that final statement. You didn't own it. However, how could it not be? She was his mom. She was meant to keep him safe. At Dr. Reeves' recommendation, Sharon started journaling in the ensuing weeks. The pages were first full of illogical ideas, such as outbursts, rage, and perplexity, but they eventually started to change. Recollections. She wrote of Noah's early years, including the times he would sneak cookies before supper, and the times he couldn't sleep and they would stay up late watching films. Writing about him was both consoling and painful, but it also started to sort through the confusion in her head. While life went on outside Fairview, Sharon was stuck in the sluggish mending process inside. She saw a young woman visiting another patient one day when she was sitting by the window once more. The girl had the same soft features and hair color as Noah's ex, and she froze. Her chest constricted. She briefly returned to Genoa City and was shouting charges at Crimson Lights. She felt a sense of guilt. Sharon had another dream that night in which she was standing over Noah's ex, yelling, accusing, and shoving her. However, Noah emerged from behind her and shook his head. His voice broke as he continued, "That's not what I wanted, Mom. You wounded her." Sharon couldn't get the image out of her head when she woke up. She's hurting too. She became aware for the first time that the girl she had accused wasn't her adversary. She was a victim of loss as well. A few weeks later, Sharon unexpectedly asked Nick if he could send her a message. To Noah's former partner. Sharon's eyes were clearer than they had been in months, but Nick paused, not sure whether it was a good idea. "I simply must apologize to her." The girl consented to meet with Dr. Reeves in attendance. Her hands were shaking and her eyes were red when she entered the hospital's guest room. As soon as Sharon saw her, she got up and started crying. They were silent for a considerable amount of time. Then the quiet was broken by Sharon. "I'm not sure where to start," she said. "I spoke awful things to you. It was easier to despise you than to face reality, therefore I wanted to do that. I reasoned that I wouldn't have to blame myself if I blamed you." The young lady shook her head and started crying. "You had every right to despise me. His heart was broken by me. I believed that by giving him space I was assisting him. I was unaware that he was disappearing." With a broken voice, Sharon extended her hand. "In different ways we both let him down. However, he wouldn't want us to live with it indefinitely. I can now see that." The love they had shared for Noah was the terrible thread that bound the two women together as they sobbed for a long time. Sharon experienced a sense of release that she hadn't experienced in months after the girl left. If only little, the weight of hatred had been removed. Sharon's recuperation took a gradual but steady turn after that day. She shared her experience with other people who had lost children at group therapy sessions. As she heard others suffering, she became aware that she wasn't the only one experiencing insanity, grief, or guilt. Every tale served as a reminder that even in situations where life seemed intolerable, survival was achievable. Sharon was grounded in reality by Mariah and Faith's frequent visits. Faith presented a painting of Noah that she had drawn from memory one afternoon. After giving it a long look, Sharon whispered, "He'd be proud of you." Faith gave a small smile. "Mom, he would also be proud of you for battling your way back." Recovery wasn't linear, though. On certain days, Sharon would wake up crying and reach for her absent kid. On certain evenings, she would sit up and stare at his old picture while apologizing in hushed tones. However, there were also times when she was able to talk about Noah without losing it. After several months, Sharon's day of discharge eventually came. As the nurse gave her documents, Nick stood next to her. Outside Fairview, the air had an odd feel to it, both new and heavy with recollections of what she had gone through. "Are you prepared to return home?" Nick asked softly. Sharon inhaled deeply, her lips quivering into the tiniest smile. She said, "I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I believe it's time to give it a shot." Sharon's house seemed different back in Genoa City, familiar but eerie. She strolled around the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, and the memories. She was reminded of Noah by everything. Unaltered since his passing, his instrument rested against the corner wall. Sharon snatched it up and ran her fingertips over the strings. A raw, broken, yet lovely chord reverberated throughout the home. She wrote in her journal once again while sitting by the fireplace that evening. "I got home today," she wrote. "I'm no longer upset, yet it still aches." Perhaps learning to live with the pain rather than forgetting it is the true essence of healing. For the first time since before her collapse, she visited Noah's cemetery the following morning. The headstones were bathed in golden light as the sun rose. His favorite flowers, fresh lilies, were placed on Sharon's knees in front of his memorial, her hands shaking. "Hey, my love," she murmured. "I apologize for taking so long to return. I realize now that I was merely keeping myself buried with you when I believed that by clinging to the suffering, I might keep you alive. Sharon felt she could practically hear his voice again as the wind rustled through the trees. It was a gentle, reassuring murmur instead of the eerie sound she had previously heard. She grinned through her tears and said, "I love you, Mom. Baby, I love you too. Always." Over the next few weeks, Sharon started piecing her life back together. She reopened Crimson Lights and gave it her all once more. She was quieter and more contemplative, but her survival of the storm had given her a kindness that the regular customers could see. One day, the shy and anxious girl she had before blamed even stopped by. She was greeted with an embrace by Sharon. She remarked, "Noah would want us to remember him with love, not suffering." Sharon's standing in Genoa City also started to improve with time. Her fortitude was now appreciated by those who had before whispered about her breakdown. They saw a woman who had survived hell and returned, stronger but not unharmed. Although their relationship wasn't the same as it had been, there was a restored respect between them, and Nick stayed near, quietly supporting her from the sidelines. Sharon organized a little tribute by the lake for her family on the anniversary of Noah's passing. Laughing and crying in equal measure, they lighted candles and told stories. Sharon's voice faltered but did not break when it was her turn to speak. She remarked, "Losing Noah broke me. I went insane. I became lost. However, I also discovered something else in that gloom. The depth of a mother's love. Death is not the end of it. It never goes away, but it does change shape. It endures in our shared love, laughter, and recollections." Sharon closed her eyes as the candles flickered against the nighttime sky, sensing Noah's presence all about her, not as a ghost haunting her sorrow, but as a warmth in her heart that led her on. Sharon Newman grinned for the first time in what seemed like forever. Not because the pain had stopped, but rather because she had at last figured out how to cope with it. Piece by fragile piece, the woman who had once lost everything had found herself again, demonstrating that even the most broken hearts can persevere.